My name is Daniel, and for most of my childhood, I lived under the shadow of a woman who wasn't my mother but acted as if she owned every piece of me. My real mother, Elena, passed away when I was 9. She was warmth, safety, and laughter. Her arms were always open, her smile always real. She had this way of making even the darkest day feel light, and when she was gone, it felt as if the sun itself had been pulled from the sky. At her funeral, I remember clutching my father's hand, watching the coffin lower, and feeling like a piece of me was buried along with her. My father cried quietly beside me, but even through his grief, he wasn't alone for long. Within a year, he remarried, and that's when Victoria entered our lives. To everyone else, Victoria was charm incarnate. She was elegant, graceful, and quick with a smile that could make anyone believe she was the perfect wife and stepmother. She cooked elaborate meals through parties and complimented neighbors so lavishly that they practically adored her. But behind closed doors, that mask slipped. For me, she was cold, calculating, and quietly cruel. It wasn't overt abuse, it was the kind of manipulation that seeps into your bones, makes you question yourself, makes you feel small. She'd belittle me with backhanded comments, undermine my confidence, and slowly wedge distance between me and my father. For years, I accepted it. I was just a boy trying to survive in a house that no longer felt like home. But when I turned 16, everything changed. One night, rummaging through an old trunk in the attic, I found something that would alter my life forever. Letters. Dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon, their paper yellowing with age. They were written in my mother's handwriting. Unmistakable, elegant, filled with love. But beneath the tenderness, there was something else. Warnings. She wrote about suspicions she had of Victoria, who had been a family friend long before she became my stepmother. In the letters, she detailed moments when she caught Victoria lingering too close to my father, whispering behind closed doors, manipulating situations to her advantage. My mother hadn't accused outright, but she had left a trail of doubts, hints of betrayals, and fears for the future if anything ever happened to her. Reading those words, my chest tightened. It felt like my mother had reached across time to hand me a weapon, to tell me that the unease I felt all these years wasn't my imagination. Victoria wasn't just cruel, she had always been a predator circling our family, waiting for her moment. I hid the letters carefully, tucking them inside a hollowed-out book in my room. And from that night forward, I stopped being just the quiet stepson enduring her games. I became a player in my own right, silently planning, watching, waiting for the chance to turn her manipulations against her. Victoria didn't notice the shift at first. She continued her usual tactics, criticizing the way I dressed, mocking my friends, twisting my father's perception of me with subtle lies. "Daniel seems distracted," she'd say with faux concern, or "I don't think he's applying himself at school." My father, exhausted from work and blinded by her perfect wife routine, would nod along. I played the part of the obedient son, but inside, I was cataloging every detail, every inconsistency, every lie. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. "You know, Daniel," she said, her voice sweet as poison, "your father and I only want what's best for you. You do well to remember who makes decisions in this house." I stared at her calmly, suppressing the anger boiling beneath my skin. "Of course," I replied. But in my mind, I repeated my mother's words from her letters. Truth never hides forever. I began small. I started planting subtle seeds of doubt in my father's mind, mirroring the tactics Victoria had used for years. If she accused me of being lazy, I would show him my grades, straight A's. If she suggested I was dishonest, I'd confront situations with transparency, making her seem paranoid or controlling. Slowly, he began to notice the cracks in her mask, though he didn't yet understand the full picture. Meanwhile, I pored over my mother's letters, memorizing every line. Some described moments where Victoria twisted conversations, others where she manipulated finances or friendships. I realized I could use these as both proof and a guide. My mother had mapped out the very traits that would one day become Victoria's downfall. One of the most damning letters described how Victoria had tried to convince my father to sell part of my mother's inheritance, a property in her family's name. My father had refused at the time, but now that property had mysteriously been listed for sale, and my father seemed unaware. When I asked him about it casually, he looked confused, brushing it off as a mistake. But I knew better. It was her. She was trying again. The knowledge burned in me, but I kept quiet. If I exposed her too early, she would find a way to twist it back on me. No, I had to be patient. Just like she had been patient all those years, weaving her way into our family, I would be patient, too. Still, patience didn't mean passivity. I started gathering evidence, printing emails, copying financial documents, even recording snippets of conversations when she let her mask slip. I felt like a spy in my own house, moving through corridors with silent precision, every discovery pushing me closer to the truth. But Victoria was no fool. She began to notice something different in me. My silence was sharper now, my obedience too perfect. She narrowed her eyes at me one evening during dinner. "You've changed," she said, her fork pausing midair. I looked at her evenly. "Maybe I've just grown up." She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Be careful, Daniel. Some people don't survive growing up." The threat was subtle, but clear. I didn't flinch. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew something she didn't. I had my mother's words, her warnings, her voice guiding me. And that made me stronger than I'd ever been. The turning point came weeks later, when I caught Victoria making a phone call late at night. She was in the study, her voice low but urgent. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear. "Yes, it'll be in my name soon. No, he has no idea."
"The boy? Don't worry about him."
"He's pliable." Pliable. That word hit me like a blade. She thought I was bendable, breakable, easy to manipulate. I clenched my fists, the letters burning in my mind. My mother had seen this coming, and now it was my turn. The next morning, I slipped one of my mother's letters into my father's briefcase, one that described Victoria's early attempts to isolate him from friends. I didn't say a word. That evening, he came home unusually quiet, his eyes flickering between Victoria and me. She tried her usual charm, but I could see doubt brewing in him. It was working. The cracks were widening. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration rushing through me. For years, I had felt powerless, a boy trapped in the schemes of a woman who wore masks better than anyone I had ever known. But now the power was shifting. Slowly, carefully, I was turning the game around. And Victoria had no idea that her greatest mistake had already been made long before, that my mother had seen her, written it all down, and left me the keys to her undoing. I woke the next morning with a renewed clarity. The letters had transformed me. Before, I'd been drifting through life in survival mode, letting Victoria control the rhythm of the house and the shape of my world. But now I had something she didn't, a legacy of truth, words preserved by my mother like seeds buried in the soil, waiting for me to discover them. Every time I reread them, it was like hearing her voice again, guiding me, strengthening me. Victoria, however, had grown sharper. I could feel her eyes on me more often, the way she studied me when I walked into the kitchen, or how her tone hardened when I didn't flinch at her barbs. She knew something had shifted. One evening at dinner, she leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine as if she were savoring a secret. "You've grown quiet, Daniel," she said smoothly. "It's unusual for a boy your age. Most are reckless, noisy, full of mistakes." "I guess I'm not like most," I replied. Her lips curved into a thin smile. "No, you're not. You're calculating." The way she said it made my pulse quicken. Did she suspect how much I knew? I kept my expression neutral, though inside my thoughts raced. "Maybe I just learned from the best," I said carefully. For the briefest moment, her eyes flickered. Then she laughed, the sound cold and sharp, and the moment passed.
But I knew she was testing me.
In the weeks that followed, I continued my careful game. I slipped more letters into my father's path, not enough to overwhelm him, but just enough to sow seeds of doubt. A line about money disappearing from accounts here, a description of her manipulative flattery there. Each time, I watched him quietly, and though he didn't say much, I saw the weight in his gaze shift. He looked at Victoria differently, hesitated when she spoke, asked small questions that made her twitch with irritation. Meanwhile, I began to collect evidence of my own. I borrowed a small voice recorder from a friend under the guise of a school project. I hid it in the study one evening, knowing Victoria often used the phone late at night. Sure enough, her voice filled the device with venom. "He's easier to handle than you think. Once the papers are finalized, it won't matter what he wants." The chill that ran down my spine was replaced quickly by resolve. She wasn't just controlling, she was plotting something bigger, something that had to do with my father, maybe even my inheritance. But exposing her wasn't simple. Victoria's gift had always been perception management. To the outside world, she was flawless, sweet, sophisticated, adored by neighbors and family friends. If I came out swinging without proof, she would twist it, turn me into the bitter stepson, grieving and unstable. I had to build the story piece by piece, let her own actions undo her. And she was giving me plenty to work with. One Saturday, she volunteered me to help at a charity event she was hosting at the mansion. "It will give you responsibility," she said, with that smile that told me it wasn't a suggestion. I went along, but what struck me most wasn't her commands, it was how she performed. She fluttered around the room, charming guests, speaking about generosity and family values, while I carried trays like a servant. People praised her endlessly, their words dripping with admiration. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them and show them the letters, the recordings, the truth. But then I caught my father watching her too. He smiled at the compliments, but his eyes looked tired, suspicious. He was beginning to see it. Later that night, after the guests had left and the mansion was quiet, I returned to the study. I placed one of the recordings carefully where I knew he would find it the next morning, on his desk beside the pile of work he always sifted through with coffee. I didn't stay to see his reaction, but when I came home from school that day, there was tension in the air. He barely spoke to Victoria, and she barely looked at him. She knew. She knew something had shifted between them. That evening, she cornered me again, her hand on my shoulder tighter than necessary. "You've been busy, haven't you?" she whispered. Her perfume was suffocating, her smile razor-thin. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "Oh, but you do," she replied, her voice low. "Whatever game you think you're playing, Daniel, remember who you're up against. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." I forced myself to meet her eyes, steady and unflinching. Maybe that's why you don't see when the game changes. For a second, her mask cracked. A flicker of anger, sharp and raw, flashed across her face. Then she let go of my shoulder, straightened, and walked away without another word. It was a dangerous line I'd crossed, but it was worth it. I had finally rattled her. In the days that followed, Victoria became more erratic. She snapped at the staff, criticized me more harshly, and even slipped in her performance around neighbors. Small things, but noticeable. My father observed it all silently, and though he didn't confront her directly, I could see him connecting the dots. But I wanted more. I wanted undeniable proof, something that even Victoria couldn't twist. And that's when I remembered the attic trunk. If my mother had left letters, maybe she had left more. One night, while Victoria was out, I returned to the attic. Dust filled the air as I rummaged through old boxes. And then, beneath blankets and forgotten albums, I found a smaller box locked. The key was gone, but the lock was old. With some effort, I pried it open. Inside were journals, ledgers, and photographs. My mother had documented everything. Bank statements she thought were suspicious, photographs of Victoria lingering too close to my father, notes on conversations she overheard. It was more than letters. It was a dossier. As I sat there flipping through the pages, I realized my mother must have known that if something happened to her, this would be my inheritance. Not just money or property, but the truth. The ultimate weapon against Victoria. But in my excitement, I didn't notice the creak of the floorboard behind me. "What are you doing?" Her voice froze me. Victoria stood in the doorway of the attic, her face pale but her eyes burning. For a moment, neither of us moved. My hands tightened around the journal, and I tried to steady my breathing. "Looking at memories," I said evenly. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on the box. "Those aren't yours." "They were my mother's," I replied. "So yes, they are." She smiled then, but it was brittle, breaking at the edges. You think you've found something powerful? You think those scraps of paper mean anything? No one will believe you. They never do. They believe me. Her confidence was infuriating, but I held firm. Maybe they used to, but not anymore. For the first time, I saw true fear flicker in her expression. She didn't snatch the box or scream. She just turned slowly, descended the attic stairs, and left me there. But the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. She knew I had something. That night, I lay awake clutching one of my mother's journals, my mind racing. I had proof now, undeniable proof. But I also had a choice. If I revealed it recklessly, she could still twist the narrative. If I played it carefully, though, I could dismantle her piece by piece, the same way she had tried to dismantle me. And that's when the idea struck me, don't just expose her. Let her expose herself. The house had never felt heavier. Every step I took echoed with the knowledge of what I now held in my possession, my mother's journals, her proof, her truth. The air between Victoria and me grew thick with unspoken tension. She no longer treated me with the same sharp, casual cruelty. Instead, there was calculation in her eyes, as if she was trying to anticipate my next move. But that was her mistake. For years, I had lived by her rules, playing the part of the pliable stepson she thought she owned. Now the rules were mine. I started carefully. I didn't confront her openly, not yet. Instead, I fed her little bits of bait. I left one of my mother's letters sitting on the coffee table one evening, as if I had accidentally dropped it. When she found it, her face tightened, but she slipped it into her pocket without a word. Later that night, I saw her in the study, shredding it with trembling hands. She thought she was covering her tracks, when in reality, she was confirming them. I recorded everything. Every whispered phone call, every moment her mask slipped, every time she muttered to herself when she thought she was alone. I built a tapestry of evidence, but more importantly, I was breaking her confidence. She was beginning to slip, and when people like her slip, they don't fall quietly, they crash loudly. One evening, I walked into the dining room to find my father and Victoria mid-argument. His voice was sharp, unusual for him. "Why did you transfer that money without telling me?" Her response was quick, sugary. "It was for us, darling. For the house, for the future." But I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. She had never expected him to question her so directly. He caught my gaze across the table, and for the first time in years, I saw doubt etched clearly on his face. Later that night, he came to my room. He sat at the edge of my bed, looking weary. "Daniel, have you noticed anything strange about Victoria lately?" It would have been easy to spill everything, to hand him the journals and recordings, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, sometimes people show us what they want us to see. But the truth, it always finds a way out. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. He didn't press further, but I knew his mind was shifting. The foundation Victoria had built for years was cracking. The opportunity came a week later. Victoria was hosting another dinner. Family, friends, relatives, even a few business associates of my father's. She was in her element, wearing an elegant gown, her laughter tinkling like glass, her words dripping with charm. To anyone else, she was perfect. But I was ready. I had placed one of the voice recordings inside the stereo system earlier that day, hidden under a playlist she used often during parties. At just the right moment, when the room was filled with chatter and admiration for her, the audio began to play. Her voice.
Clear. Cold.
Venomous. "He's easier to handle than you think. Once the papers are finalized, it won't matter what he wants.
The boy? Don't worry about him.
He's pliable." The room fell silent. Every head turned. My father's face strained of color. Victoria froze, wine glass halfway to her lips. For the first time, the mask shattered. She lunged toward the stereo, fumbling to stop the recording, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Gasps, whispers, stunned silence. "Victoria," my father said finally, his voice low and trembling with fury. "What have you done?" She stammered, tried to laugh it off, tried to spin it as some misunderstanding. But no one was convinced. The neighbors who had praised her, the relatives who had adored her. All of them looked at her now with suspicion and disgust. I watched her unravel, her composure collapsing in front of everyone. She turned to me, eyes blazing, as if she finally understood that I was the architect of her downfall. But she said nothing. She couldn't. That night, my father confronted her fully. The accounts, the transfers, the manipulations, they came spilling out. I gave him my mother's journals then, the letters, the evidence I had collected. He read them with shaking hands, his face pale with grief and realization. She knew, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Your mother knew. Victoria didn't stay much longer. The facade had crumbled, and with it, her place in our lives. She left the mansion in silence, her departure almost anticlimactic compared to the storm she had unleashed. For the first time in years, the house felt lighter. My father and I spoke openly, rebuilding a bond that she had tried so hard to sever. I felt my mother with us, her voice echoing in every page of her letters, every memory preserved in her journals. But here's the twist, the one no one saw coming. Weeks later, after Victoria had gone, I returned to the attic to sort through the rest of my mother's belongings. At the bottom of the trunk, I found one last letter, sealed and marked with my name. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, my mother's handwriting flowed, but this letter was different. It wasn't about Victoria. It was about my father, Daniel. It read, "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. You must know something. Your father is not as blind as he seems." I trusted him once, but I began to suspect that he was not only complicit in Victoria's closeness, but perhaps even welcomed it. I could never prove it, and I hoped I was wrong. But if my instincts are right, then you must be careful. Trust is fragile, even with those we love most. I sat there frozen, the words blurring as my chest tightened. All this time, I had been fighting Victoria, convinced she was the serpent in the garden. And she was. But what if she hadn't slithered in unnoticed? What if she had been invited? When I confronted my father gently days later, he denied it. He swore my mother had been mistaken, paranoid in her illness. And maybe that was true. But I had learned one thing above all else. Truth doesn't hide forever. So while the mansion feels freer, lighter, safer, I keep my mother's last letter hidden in the hollowed book beside my bed. Because some battles end, and some just wait, lingering in the shadows, until the time comes to reveal what still lies buried. And maybe one day, the truth about my father will rise, just as it did with Victoria.